Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to She Asks.
Yes.
I'm Jennifer, and this is our host.
Anna McBride. So happy you're here.
Yeah, so we just recorded a solo episode with Anna talking about her son's wedding and making living amends. So what we're going to do on this episode is talk about what amends are and whether or not you need to be working a 12-step program to make them. In the context of 12 steps, what is an amend?
So amends are for things that we have considered or learned that we've done harm to someone else. In any 12-step program, you are called to clean up your side of the street, the history. And once you've accepted the foundation of the program, then you're called to do an inventory of yourself. And what that means, it's a fearless and moral inventory around the things that are things that you've done, resentments that you've held, assets that you hold, as well as what we consider defects of character, which basically look like behaviors that we're not so proud of. And then further up the chain of the step work, you're called to make an amends. First, you're called to make a list of all people you have harmed, and then become willing to make amends to them all, and then to enact those amends. And so what is an amends? An amends is really changed behavior. It's not an I'm sorry, although there are apologies attached to the delivery. It is really only saying it if you are ready to really be different.
And that's a good distinction, because to someone who is not familiar with 12 steps, amends is just, it is change, right? To amend something. You had just mentioned that making an amends is to make a changed behavior. So what can that look like, and how can we make sure that we are being someone of dignity to make sure that this is true for us and that we actually have changed?
I think the way I will choose to answer it is first before you can amend anything, I think it's really important to know what your part in it is. And so to know what your part is requires you to know who you are. When I was doing my 12-step work, I went into the process thinking like I had failed at everything. And gratefully to understand that no, I was affected by somebody else's drinking, in my case, and it could be addiction of many sorts. But because I was exposed to that and brought up in that environment, I adapted. And I adapted in ways that helped me to survive that situation. And I carried that into my life thinking this was a great way to live. It was a strategy for survival. It wasn't a strategy for thriving or for raising children or marriage. So I came into the 12-step program after my marriage had ended. And I really had hoped that I was going to learn what could help me save the marriage. And a lot of people go into recovery, as I understand it, because they want to help get the alcoholic or the addict to stop doing that addictive behavior. And what we learned very quickly from working the program is it's not about what the other person's doing, it's about us. And so the invitation to really get to know myself in a way that I hadn't really done before was primary. And I had to trust the work, the connection with someone else, my sponsor, to do that. So I took an inventory. I got to know what were the things that I did on a regular basis. Some of the stuff I knew were great, and some of the stuff I felt somewhat shamed about. And yet I laid it all out there for me to see, for me to share, for me to own. And once I was willing to do that, inherent in that inventory are all the people that I affected by my behavior. My siblings, my spouse, my children, my friends, my clients, my students, etc. Everyone was affected by me. And not all illfully, thankfully, yet some definitely. And that's where the amend opportunity happens, particularly if the matter is, the relationship is of consequence. So there's a step 8 where you make a list of all people that you had harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And then there's a step 9 where you make the amends. And so the amends that I was called to do really required me to know how I was showing up in all of these situations and what was my part in that. So in each of these relationships, I had to inventory how I had, in my perception, my experience, how I had done harm to them. And then I laid all that out for my sponsor, in which she pointed out to me, where are you in all this? Meaning, how were you harmed by this? What harm did you do to yourself? And so she told me to go back to the beginning and begin with me. And I had to, again, inventory how my life experience, my behavior, my coping, my strategizing, my being with other people in relationship had harmed me. And that took me quite a process to understand, to appreciate, and to make amends for. And that required me to really, in my words, walk the walk, talk the talk, live with integrity, say what I mean, what I say, for the first time in my life, where my outsides were a reflection of my insides. And once I got that down, then I was ready to make amends to other people.
Yeah, just to reiterate, talking about how the amends is the icing on the cake, but you have to really set down the layers before you get there.
Yes.
And whether or not you are in a 12-step program, this is something to be guided by someone else who has done something similar. And if you are a little hesitant over whether you want to do a 12-step program, what would you suggest are some just primary journaling prompts for someone who wants to start to take a look at these amends and whether or not they are like sanctioned by a 12-step program? Very briefly, like where would you start for someone that knows that they need to make some change and they know that they've done some wrong with a tumultuous relationship? Where would you start to make sure you're on the way to this healing?
That's a good question. I think what I have come to appreciate is that I have a part in everything that happens to me. Through recovery work, I've learned that I'm not a victim. I'm a participant in my life. I may feel affected by it. However, I am the main character in my life. So knowing that, what that means is that if I have a conflict with someone, if I have an upset with someone, if I have resentment towards someone, I own a part of that. And so some journaling around, I always like to coach my clients saying, put down on paper what has happened, like just the facts, describe it, like it's a story, but a summary. And then after that summary, then write down for yourself, like what was my part in that? What did I contribute to it? If it's an upset, we all have a part in upsets. We're not just the receiver of, we tend to respond to and participate in an upset within any relationship, if there is one. So yes, what is my part in it? What are the feelings that I have about it? And then maybe even write down some notes around, does this feel historical to me? Is this a new thing, or maybe did I experience this earlier in my life in my family of origin? And what I found is, in my understanding of my own circumstances, is that every upset I had now had a tie back to, in some way, shape, or form, thematically, or some details were very similar to stories of my family of origin. And so that's to say, which is what my recovery work has led me to know, is that everything we're experiencing now is like a projection of what we went through as a younger person, because in our younger states we were learning, coping, adapting in situations that were, at least in my case, very dysfunctional. And so I carried that experience with me as a model for how I handle upset later, how I relate later. And remember, it was based on a dysfunctional foundation. So now, through recovery, I'm rebuilding a foundation that is healthier, that is more connective. And that requires me being humble enough to know that I'm not perfect. I come with baggage. And if I really want to connect with the person, if I care about the person that I'm in conflict with, that I want to be willing to say, okay, I may have played a part in this. I wonder what that is.
Yeah, taking that ownership and accountability is such an integral part of the whole process. And there's moments where you reflect on maybe some estranged relationships that can be very anxiety inducing. And I know it was for me when I was going through my step work and writing down my resentments and where I was part of the fuel to the fire of these resentments.
Yes.
And then before I made those amends, while I was making these lists and getting very granular into the history, and something you had mentioned was looking at the patterns, right? Maybe we're trying to focus on amends on one person, but there's so much information when we start to make a list on pretty much every relationship, and we can start to see, oh, I dip out of the relationship before I give it a chance. And then I'm the one upset that I'm single when I continue to do this in every single romantic partnership. So starting the work starts with writing the story in a third person narrative without any emotional attachment, and then seeing your part.
Yes.
Before we can move forward. When doing that work, when you naturally start to feel tension because you are provoking those emotions from a very rigid time, how can you soothe in doing this deep work?
I think we all could benefit from practicing grounding practices. I myself, when I'm doing this introspective work, I will go take a walk, I will take a bath, I will pray, I'll meditate, I'll listen to music in order to shift my mood if I find that I'm getting caught up in, let's say, a negativity mind train is what I call it, or emotional train that is leaving me feeling stuck instead of being able to get away from it. None of this stuff is meant to be done for extended period of time, so let's be clear about that. It's good to have parameters around. I like to do it in chunks of 30 minutes or maybe an hour at most, depending on what my availability is. But I have a higher tolerance because I've been doing this practice for a while. Somebody new might only be able to do it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the journaling part, right? Because if you are easily hooked by feelings related to writing down the story, you got to have an exit strategy. You have to have a way to detach. And maybe that might look like, as I described, going for a walk or taking a bath or listening to music. It might require you to call a friend or go to a meeting, something that will help you. So have that as a part of your practice. I do that. And I think it's important that we validate what we're feeling. So before we go to soothe ourselves, let's just take a moment, because it's only a moment, to acknowledge what we're feeling. I have this practice, I'm not perfect at it, but I do have an alarm on my phone that goes off 4 or 5 times a day, in which it calls me to breathe and feel. Breathe, feel, and write it down. And because I want to really honor what I'm feeling. If we don't honor how we feel, it's as if it doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter to us, why would we expect it to matter to somebody else? It's got to begin with us. And that honoring of those feelings is a bit of an amends also.
Because we don't want to negate or suppress anything
Right.
that's happened. It's almost also like a reminder, oh, this is something I've been through, and yet I'm still here. I'm stronger for it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some wonderful do's, having some time limitations. I will share some of my don'ts and then ask you.
Okay.
My don'ts would be, spending a whole afternoon writing. Because, like yourself, I'm a writer and I can go for hours. I can get in the flow. And it definitely wore on me when I was spending just a whole stretch of time. So don't do that. And then also, I remember it was around Christmas time. I was writing in a restaurant and all of a sudden it became happy hour and there was flights of beers and I was on the verge of a panic attack and I really wanted to drink. It wasn't because I wanted to drink for any odd reason other than I'm over it. Like I'm over this kind of emotional work. I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to fit. And I also, and then I also, my part was so prominent in my mind that I just felt like a terrible person, which is something you mentioned. Have a backup plan. And my plans were just to call people that I had met who were also doing this work in the 12-step programs. And sometimes people don't answer right away. And they call you back. And I thought I was being tested by God because it was like 3 calls in a row. And I left the restaurant and just was walking around like a crazy person. So my second don't tip is to make sure your environment is conducive for this and conducive for potential anxiety moments where you're not going to be triggered to do something that you're trying to recover from. Do you have anything to add to things to be wary of?
Yeah, I think don't have expectations like you're going to do it perfectly or with clarity. Understand that the process is a bit of like peeling an onion. And so the first layer can be very superficial and it's easy to judge it as such. And then the next layer could be a little deeper. Yet it may those layers may be separated by weeks, by days, by writing sessions. And so be patient. I always say, give yourself grace, don't give yourself shame. Don't be the critic, don't be the person who turns on yourself, so don't do that. Also, I think you were saying reaching out to people is know who you can reach out to and who you ought not to reach out to, because I could probably call 20 people that I know will pick up the phone, yet would they give me what I want, what I need? Probably not, if they're not the right kind of people. And so it's important to know who to call and who not to call. And then lastly, I think understanding my limitations. Like I'm a morning person, and so the best writing I do in terms of any kind of, whether I'm doing an inventory or I'm writing for my book or podcast, I do it first thing in the morning. I don't do it at night. If I'm at night, I'm asleep. I'm not in, I'm out. And so knowing what your limitations are. If I'm going into this weekend coming up that's a wedding, am I going to do writing that weekend? No, because I've got other things going on. So be fair to yourself. Don't put yourself into an expectation that is not realistic. And then also there's this expression we use in recovery that says, if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So it's called HALT, right? So that's not the framework in which to do any kind of recovery work. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, self-care. Then come back to the work later, because you're basically going to be dealing with resistance and all kinds of other things that aren't conducive to being able to see things clearly. And be gentle. It's meant to be a gentle process, not one in which you force it to be done.
Right. And I guess to just sum it up, speaking of the term living amends, how would you best describe the difference between an amends and a living amends?
The difference for me is, so an amends is relating to recovery, is really an action that I take. It's a formalized meeting that I set up and I address before it. I make sure that I'm clear about what I'm going to be speaking about in terms of amends. What do I owe the person in amends for? And then I address that in the meeting. And so it's a conversation in which I'm sharing my ownership of my side of our conflict. So it's a formalized process. Living amends is not any less formal if you make it such, meaning it's sacred, because for me it's sacred. What it is that what will I no longer do? When I got into recovery, I made a very short list of these are my, to be with integrity with recovery, this is what I will no longer do. I no longer will be dishonest, I no longer will gossip, and I no longer will pretend that I am the higher power in my life. I no longer will pretend that I'm alone or that I'm anyone else's higher power. And so I had to right size my ego, in other words. And those are like my commitments. And then generalize those out when I'm living my amends. Like if I am living with integrity, I am able to show other people that I walk the walk. I'm not just talking the talk. And that matters to me because I want my mind, my body, and my spirit to be in alignment, and my message to be in alignment with who I am and who I've recovered to be. And so that's what I view as a living amends. And to me, quite frankly, that is far more powerful and more important than a formalized meeting. Not to take away from it, because it is a part of the process, and programs have shown that people benefit from that. Yet my life experience has shown that my relationships that matter of consequence, my children, for example, I live differently, I carry myself differently with them, around them, in my own life, and that's what they trust. And I want to be somebody that they can trust. I want to be somebody that I can trust. And when I can live like that, I know that's the truth. And yeah, I think living amends matters, at least for me.
So, thank you so much. And for those listening, I'm sure so many of you are familiar with the 12-step program and have maybe made amends their own. And if you haven't, know that it's not as intimidating as it may seem, and that you can start by just taking that inventory of your life, of your day, of your most recent thoughts. I think the core of this all is to have some self-awareness and allow yourself some time for reflection, which
absolutely
is a gift for all
and remember,
of us.
We're here as a resource. So if you want some coaching, if you have some questions, if you want to share your story, don't hesitate to reach out to the She Asked podcast. We're here to receive, we're here to reflect, we're here to really offer practical hope through tools that you can impart in your life, because we want to help you live the life you want to live. So thank you for tuning in. And until soon, be well.